making it easy.
Yeah.
Um, so one of the first things we could touch on is adapting our environment. So we just mentioned this idea that um, we tend to, as adults in the modern world, try and squeeze periods of exercise into a routine. So we're at this one extreme or the other. We're either at work or doing things that we need to do, and then we go and work really hard in the gym for 45 minutes. So we think that probably a much more natural approach to this is to try and fit movement into your day. Um, it feels better doing it this way, and depending on what you do for a living, there might be more or less challenges around doing that. If you work from home, certainly I think it's something much more achievable. When I'm working from home, just to give an example of how this might work, I've got various bits of equipment strewn about all over the house. So whether it's foam rollers, yoga mats, grip trainer, I've got a pull-up bar outside, and just whenever I feel like getting away from the screen, I go and do a couple of minutes, 5 minutes, sometimes longer. So the movement is spread out over the day, and I think this is an approach that is much more sustainable in the long term. There's less fatigue. Um, it tends to actually, I find, pick you up mentally as well during the day. So if you've been concentrating on something for a while, um, this can just kind of refresh that mental energy as well. Um, yeah, well, what are your thoughts on this, Mike?
My thoughts on it are I'm amongst the laziest of the lazy when it comes to doing stuff. And some people will look at me, they always said, "Oh, you've always been so physically active and stuff." I've been overweight a lot of that time, but now I'm probably in the best shape of my life since my early 20s. Um, but I don't want to make it hard. I can sit on the sofa with the best of them. So very much like yourself, I came across this idea of the minimum effective dose in movement, and then came across concepts from like people like Pavel Tsatsouline, kettlebell fame, um, Dan John in the strength and conditioning world, Phil Maffetone, who I think we talked about in one of our posts, about making it easy, and these 1 to 2 minute bursts here or there, scattered throughout the day. It doesn't feel like I'm taking extra time. I don't. I'm not worried about feeling knackered afterwards. The way I used to train, I'd go out cycling with a triathlon club and I'd burn up all the hills. I'd race back to the home line, but then I'd spend the rest of the day on the sofa, not doing anything and not having the mental energy to do anything. I still have a tendency to overdo it when I go and play squash. That's my sort of competitive go out there and do it. Um, but actually, I enjoy stuff. I feel so much better when I work well within my bounds. I'm going to chuck out a figure here, 50%. And this was something that came across to me. I think it was Body, Mind and Sport, John Doyard, and talking about training at 50% of our capacity. And people will say, "Oh, well, you've got to train hard." Well, you can do everything at what intensity at 50%, other than maybe your 1 RM max. Because if you 1 RM max, for those who don't know, is the maximum weight you can lift in one go, and you can only do it for one repetition. Now that's difficult to do 50% of, but maybe you'd only lift it halfway. That could be a way. But if you had a 2 RM, which is still pretty damn hard work, you can just do one lift, and that's 50%. In terms of a run, if you can run 5K in 25 minutes, well, can you run at that pace for 2.5K? Could you do that more frequently? It's the whole basis of interval training, is doing shorter, more intense bursts, but also then not doing it to fatigue, so that you can do it more often. And I just find that works so much better for me. I put in a minute here, a minute there, sometimes a bit longer. And alongside, I mean, I have done other things, manipulated my job so that I am fairly physical in that as well, and that's much more of a longer term environment adaptation. But yeah, I want to keep things as easy as possible and as time easy as possible as well.
Yeah, I think that leads nicely into our next principle, which is taking a skill-based approach.
Yeah.
So with regard to movement, I was certainly in this trap for a long, long time, which was that the only way to train is to just go 100% every time.
Hmm.
And yeah, I could do that for a little while until I couldn't anymore. Um, so I was forced to find a different way of doing things. Um, and yeah, I guess I'm grateful for that now. So I think we've been talking a little bit recently about the idea of running and how many people, when they're thinking of embarking on a new fitness regime, running is a really popular thing for people to jump into.
Yeah.
Uh, Things like couch to 5K, and it's great because you don't need a gym. All you need is something to put on your feet, and away you go. Although even that point's debatable. Um, so I think it's a natural movement that most of us feel good doing, or can remember a time at least where we felt good doing it. Um, but we tend to approach it in a capacity mindset, thinking about distance and time. So straight away we enter into a race that's defined, or an event that's defined by the distance. I'm going to do a 5K. I'm going to do
Hmm.
a 10K, a marathon. Um, Rather than thinking about the quality of how we run or the skill of running. So the way we're looking at this really is to develop that skill first, and most likely the capacity is then going to follow with hopefully a lot less discomfort, risk of injury, blood, sweat, and tears basically along the way. And this doesn't just have to apply to running. I just bring that up because that's one that people can relate to quite easily. But all movement practices have a skill element. Weightlifting is a skill. Um, Most sports, it's quite obvious that there's a skill element. But yeah, some of the things that we think about in terms of uh, things that we do for fitness or for our health, we can sometimes get into a bit of an idea of quite mundane things, things like cardio, strength, flexibility. Yes, these are attributes that are worth developing, but I think it can become quite tedious if we just think about developing these physical attributes. Um, but when we take this more skill-based, playful approach, I think we can enjoy the process, see the beauty of the process of the movement that we're trying to develop, and all those attributes, they come along for the ride: the strength, the flexibility, the cardiovascular improvements.
Definitely. We mentioned a couple of anecdotal and one-liners based on this, and you came up with a really good one earlier. Can you remember what that was?
Um, yeah, getting better at being shit.
Yeah, getting better at being shit. If you've got shit running form, excuse the four-letter word there, you're going to get better at it, but that shit running form is going to predispose you to injury. And the harder you push that shit form, it's like driving a car that's wheels are unbalanced, or riding a bike where the wheel isn't centered properly and it's maybe rubbing on the frame. You can push harder and it will develop your capacity, but eventually the bike will break, the car will break, and if it's just your body will break. Um, that was one I really liked for you, and I think you said it. For me, it's develop the skill, and then if you need to develop the capacity and the skill, you'll get a certain amount anyway. I think we tend to do it the wrong way round. We say, ah, I'm going to run a 5K or a marathon or whatever, and it's in this amount, 3 months, 6 months, a year's time, and we train with that outcome in mind, and we predominantly think of the capacity. I've trained a few runners to do the half marathons and marathons, but actually they came to me with injuries and stuff like that, and I actually turned around and over time convinced them not to run the marathon because they were getting more injured. Um, my wife, ex-wife, we took a very different approach. We just had to work within our bounds, and we had to do far less than the original plan she'd been given the year before by a very successful running coach in the Northeast. But we really had to tailor it down. And simplistically, I want to give an anecdote of this. One of my clients at Bodyguard's personal training studio in Jesmond, when I worked there, she ran, but she hated it with a passion. But she was one of these people who did things because she thought she should. And when I asked her why she hated it, it was like, it's just horrible. It's full of effort, etc. And I said, well, okay, can we have a look at this and can we just play around with it? And I took her outside and I introduced some different techniques, but we would never run further than 30 to 100 meters in one go. And her comments at the end of this, like when I asked, like, how was that? And she just looked, she had this curious smile on her face. And it was like, I'm going, what's going on? It's like, and she said, well, one of the reasons I've always hated running is because I always felt like a rhino. And trust me, she didn't look like a rhino. She was close on 60. She was very svelte and trim. But then she said, today, when I got your drills right and everything, I felt like an antelope. And that to me is the essence of skillful movement and natural movement when we're doing it well. Is we feel good doing it. We have a much nicer picture of ourselves and the effort, and we want to do more of it because it feels good. But one of the key principles in that is only do it whilst it feels good, and then stop. Give yourself a rest. You might be able to go again, but predominantly, if you can do it whilst it feels good, that's a good way of practicing it.
I think this skills-based approach, to zoom out a little bit, it's something that we aim to apply to more than just movement. So we're also thinking about a skills-based approach in terms of how we manage our minds and our thoughts and other simple things like our nutrition. If you have the skills to cook a meal that you can enjoy in a relatively convenient manner, then you're much more likely to have success with your nutrition. So those are other aspects that we'll be looking at as well. I think we can just summarize that there, if you like, and move on to our next principle, unless there's anything you want to add.
Yeah, just one line about mental skills. One of the biggest issues I've certainly faced in my life is the mental chatter that either leads me down a path of thinking I don't want to be led down, or it just stops me doing the things that I've actually set out to do. And I use a skills-based approach in trying to overcome that. Is I develop skill sets that I need to practice that are hard at the beginning, but get better over time. So I'm much more aware now of when I go into a dark brain chatter mode, which brings me down, and I can cut it off a lot earlier, whereas it used to go on for hours with significant consequences on the back of that. So yeah, mental matters, big part of it as well.